The Radicalism of the American Revolution, 1991, is a non-fiction work by Gordon S. Wood, a prominent American historian and professor at Brown University. Contrary to the common perception that the American Revolution was a relatively restrained intellectual affair led by well-mannered elites, Wood contends that it was a deeply transformative and radical event, on par with any other major revolution in world history. His book explores the profound social, political, and cultural shifts that reshaped American society before, during, and after the Revolution. Most revolutions are marked by violence, upheaval, and widespread destruction, but Americans often see their own revolution as exceptional, a product of debate, pamphlets, and political discourse rather than bloodshed. Founding figures like Jefferson, Adams, and Franklin are typically viewed as gentlemen rather than revolutionaries. Wood challenges this narrative by closely examining the evolution of colonial society and its break from traditional British hierarchies. In the early to mid-18th century, the American colonies were modeled after English society, but on a smaller and more intimate scale. Settlements were often formed by just a few families, creating close-knit communities where privacy was rare and the government frequently intervened in personal affairs. The absence of a traditional aristocracy led to the rise of a class of self-styled gentlemen who distinguished themselves by education, dress, and economic independence. To be a gentleman meant distancing oneself from manual labor and relying on one's own means rather than wages. In contrast, common laborers were seen as uneducated, self-interested, and politically insignificant, a class dependent on guidance from their social superiors. This paternalistic order positioned gentlemen as the moral and civic leaders of colonial life. However, as Enlightenment ideals began to take root in England, drawing on the republican values of ancient Rome, these ideas soon found fertile ground in the colonies. Influenced by thinkers like Cicero and Virgil, colonists embraced concepts of liberty, independence, and civic virtue. Because the American colonists were not as deeply embedded in the monarchical structure as their English counterparts, they were more receptive to these emerging republican ideals. At the same time, economic limitations and a predominantly agrarian society began to strain the social fabric of colonial life. As communities grew and diversified, traditional hierarchies weakened, making space for new, more democratic forms of leadership and identity. It was in this context, Wood argues, that the revolution ignited, not just as a political event, but as a radical reimagining of American society. For his groundbreaking work, Gordon S. Wood received the 1993 Pulitzer Prize for History. In 2010, President Barack Obama awarded him the National Humanities Medal, recognizing his contributions to the understanding of America's revolutionary past. As the population of the American colonies surged, driven by high birth rates, low death rates, and steady immigration, the economy began to transform. Land shortages emerged in some regions, pushing settlers westward after the British defeat of the French in 1759 opened new territories. Colonists seized the opportunity, expanding agricultural production beyond subsistence. Farmers began cultivating surplus crops like corn and wheat for trade, creating a budding import-export economy. This shift sparked broader economic changes. Inland trade expanded, banks began to appear, and paper currency became more common. For the first time, many individuals who had lived without wealth experienced financial opportunity. The old belief that labor merely served basic survival began to erode, replaced by a new view of work as a path to independence and prosperity. These economic developments also altered family and social dynamics. As communities became more dispersed, the tight-knit social structures of early colonial life began to dissolve. The nuclear family rose in importance, and child-rearing practices shifted, reflecting changing priorities. The long-standing tradition of paternalism, where elite leaders acted as caretakers of society, began to lose legitimacy. It came to be seen not as natural but as a human invention. As social bonds frayed, colonial society moved from a patronage-based model to one rooted in impersonal contracts and market relationships. With this change came anxiety, a fear that wealth and property could be lost as easily as gained. After the Revolutionary War, however, common men increasingly embraced the revolution's ideals of equality and freedom. They took on larger roles in trade, selling not only farm goods but also homemade manufactured products. In the North, the emergence of small-scale factories further reshaped the economy. The proliferation of banks and paper money in towns and cities marked a continued departure from the past. Old class distinctions faded, and with them, the social glue that had once held communities together. Attempts to rebuild these bonds through institutions like government or the church largely failed. People preferred a government that stayed in the background and chose churches aligned with their personal beliefs rather than community obligations. These shifts worried the Founding Fathers. Many feared that the republic they had envisioned was unraveling. Yet despite their concerns, ordinary citizens pressed forward, united by the democratic spirit of the revolution. They built a new society, one not exactly as the founders had planned, but one that endured far beyond their time. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy this video, leave a like and subscribe.